Before we get started, I just want to point out that a lot of artists are really nervous about not being good at art and good at drawing. And I want you to know that drawing is a language that anyone can learn. So, like anyone can learn a language, they can learn to cook or play basketball or ride a bike. You can learn how to draw. How good you are at drawing depends a lot on you. So people who draw well are not magical creatures. They practice a lot, they take their time, and they care about making sure things are just right based on whatever they think looks good. They take time to learn from other people that they think are better than them. And what I think is good is not necessarily what you think is good. Art can look like a lot of different things, and good can look like a lot of different things. What we're looking at here in this picture is a famous sketch by Leonardo da Vinci called The Vitruvian Man. In the Italian Renaissance, that time and place, people were really obsessed with learning how the human body worked and about these perfect mathematical proportions of the human body. Another thing I want you to know is that the human figure, when we talk about proportions, we're talking about averages. Averages means that you could have some really tall people in a group and some really short people in the group, and when we average them, we're going to get a medium height person. So human proportions are averages. That means that there's lots of different body types above and below average height, average weight, average physical structure. Drawing human proportions can be learned easily, but drawing people realistically or based on looking closely at them, or drawing cartoon characters that tell a story, that takes lots of time and attention to detail. It is said that the human body's proportions are roughly 7 or even 8 heads tall. If you look at the picture above, you can see this person's head measured 7 times, and that is the proportion of the body. Depending on where you're from, the proportions may be different. Some countries, people's average heights are much taller, and some countries, people's average heights are much smaller or shorter. Also, your gender can play a role, and your family genetics can play a role in what average height looks like for you. Though if you look at the top picture on the left, you can see how the body is actually broken out into lines. There's lines for the shoulders, there's lines for the spine, for the legs, the arms, and the head. Notice also that in the top example, they're showing a figure that is 7 heads tall, and in the bottom example, they're showing a figure that is 8 heads tall. There's a little bit of disagreement over what is the perfect human proportions. I don't believe there is such a thing. I think people just like the number 8 because the math is so much easier in figuring out where the other body parts are. And just to show you what I mean by averages, this is an interesting chart that I found talking about average heights of people from different parts of the world during different times. This starts at 1810 and goes up to 1980. And you can see there's some big differences. Number one, all of the height averages are trending up. The reason why is because nutrition got better. So as people are able to eat more vitamins and live longer and healthier lives, we get bigger. We get taller. We also get chubbier in a lot of countries where there's an overabundance of food. But you can see that different parts of the world have different average heights. What we're going to be learning how to do today is to look at the human body as basic lines and maybe even shapes. You can see 2 examples here. One where the artist is using just lines and a little bit of a volume on the torso or rib cage. And then another one where the artist is using spheres and cubes in order to sort of delineate what a human body can look like and what a pose can look like. What we're going to be learning today is how to look at a human body and kind of figure out what pose it might be in and how to start with a stick figure to create our figure drawing. So here's an image of the ballerina Misty Copeland. I'm going to trace with this red pen so you can see how I would look at a picture and trace the human proportions, starting with the spine and the head. I'm going to draw, instead of a rectangle, more of a trapezoid or kind of a curved rectangle because I want to show that her torso is bent. I'm going to mark where her shoulders, her wrists, and elbows are, and then I'm going to connect those. What's underneath the body of Misty Copeland is basically a stick figure. Next, I'm going to mark where I think the hips probably are, where the hip joints are. I'm going to mark the knees and the ankles. Next, let's take a look at this group of characters. Here's a couple people doing a Fortnite dance. Again, I'm going to figure out where the torso is. I'm going to figure out where the head is. This person's head is kind of turned, drawing the spine, and you can see the torso isn't a perfect rectangle. It's more of a trapezoid that got bent. I'm going to mark the elbows and wrists of the character, and then I can draw that straight line. I'm going to mark the knees and the ankles of that character, and you can see even though the one leg is facing us and one leg is kind of bent up in the air and away from us, what's underneath is still straight lines. The last example we're going to look at is one of the members of the everyone's favorite band, BTS. So here we have a dancer in a kind of weird crouched position, and his torso's not perfectly straight, so my lollipop is kind of bent. I'm also noticing one shoulder is way higher than the other. So instead of drawing a rectangle, I'm going to draw like a prism shape. It's kind of curving up and pushing down in the other areas. And I'm guessing where I think his hips are because his hand's in the way and he's got baggy clothing on. So I'm just doing a guess where I think the joints are bending. I'm marking the knees, I'm marking the ankles, the wrists, and the elbows, and then I can connect them, and I'm going to end up with a simple stick figure. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start by drawing the vertical line here, and I'm going to find the middle of it. I've marked the top, the middle, and I'm using my fingers to see if they're about equal, and I'm going to break it up into quarters. It's looking good, so I'm going to continue. Now I'm going to break up each of those quarters into eighths, and that's going to give me 8 heads to deal with. And I think that people like to break it up into eighths and do 8 heads over 7 because the math for 8 is much easier. So I've drawn my little oval head at the top. It's basically from 0 to 1, and I'm drawing the lollipop, which is the spine. And I'm going to draw it down to 4, and I'm going to make sort of a box shape that gets a little bit narrower. There's lots of other ways to draw a torso, but this is a pretty simple one. Then I'm going to figure out where my ankles are, and they are just above the 8 line. And I'm going to measure where my knees are, and my knees, the top of the leg and the bottom of the leg, are of equal lengths. So I can use my fingers to measure and see, are they about equal? Roughly, that one's a little bit long, and I moved it. Same with the arms. I'm putting my shoulders in. The wrists fall just below the hip bones. So I know that's how long my arms are going to be. And my elbows and between my shoulder and my elbow to my wrist are also equal length. So I can measure them. Now I have a figure that is 8 heads tall. Next, I can start to add some lines to show where the muscles would actually be on the human figure here. This is very rough. I'm just going to be sort of thickening the areas where I know there's muscles and areas of fat. Well, that calf is way too big. And I'm just kind of going through and making my shapes, correcting my sort of Mickey Mouse shapes and turning them into what I think are more realistic looking shapes. Next, I'm going to be drawing a figure in motion. I think I'm going to draw someone swimming. So I'm going to try to draw them horizontally. And I'm going to start with that lollipop shape, the head and the spine. And I know that from the top of the head to the spine is 1/2 of the body. So that means the legs are going to be the other half of the length. And I'm kind of trying to draw a trapezoid because the body's slightly turned. I'm putting my shoulders and my elbows and wrists in. And remember, they're equal lengths. That one looks a little off. Then I'm going to do the same with my knees and my ankles, making sure those lengths are about equal. So I can pose the body in any way using this little stick figure idea. And I fixed that length there. And I'll do some simple flipper feet. And then I can add some muscles to sort of show the figure looking slightly more realistic. All right, now it is your turn to draw the human figure using the proportions we just learned.